In this video, I'm going to show you my recipe for painting yellow. Hello everyone and welcome to another Brushstroke painting guide. So as you heard from the intro there, this is going to be a recipe video, and in this particular case I'm going to look at how I paint yellow. So I've done some Imperial fists before, like the one in the picture here, and I often get asked how I get such a smooth, clean, bright yellow. So I thought I'd just make a quick video and show you the recipe that I use. Now before we begin, I think there's a few things I should mention which will help you get the most out of this video, starting off with thinning your paints. So this recipe relies quite heavily on getting that nice clean smooth finish, so if you'd like to know more about how I thin my paints and how thin is thin, then you might want to check out the paint thinning video I did by clicking the link above. I also get asked a lot about the paintbrushes I use. Now, thanks to the awesome guys at Artis Opus, I now actually have a paintbrush set, which has brushes in it which are specifically picked to match the brushes that I use in all of my paint guides. So if you'd like more details on that, then please do click this link above. And then finally, I have a video that I've made on the wet palette that I use because I get a lot of questions on that. So if you'd like to know more about the details on my wet palette, then please click the link above, or you'll find all the links in the description below. Okay then, so let's dive in and start some painting. So as you can see, I've already primed my model. In this particular case, it's a Space Marine backpack, but it could be any model at all. And because I want a really bright, vibrant, punchy yellow, I've primed it all over in white. Now I used Vallejo Surface Primer because I find it really nice and smooth, but you can pretty much use any primer that you like, as long as it's white or a very pale grey. So to start off with, I'm going to base coat in all the areas I want to be yellow, and for this I'm going to start off with a colour which might surprise you because I'm going to base coat in with some Ushabti Bone from Games Workshop. Really simple step to start off with then. I've thinned the paint down on my palette so it's flowing really cleanly and smoothly, and I'm going to apply several coats in order to get to a solid finish. Now the aim here is to get that smooth finish, so do take your time. Make sure you apply the coat evenly across the whole of the surface and work it into all of those details and recesses. You don't need to be careful of other details because you'll paint those in afterwards, so you can use a bigger brush and you can get this job done nice and quick. So why am I using Ushabti Bone rather than a yellow? Well, hopefully that will become clear as we get further into the guide, but for now you should find that it's a lot easier to work with and you can get a smoother base coat on than you would do maybe with a darker yellow. As you can see, this first coat is a little patchy in areas, but that's absolutely fine. Just concentrate on getting it on evenly and smoothly, and then we can come back in and apply a second coat to build up to a solid finish, which when you're done should look something like this. Now this is the stage where you'd paint in the rest of your base coats, so I'll do that now, and that means we can move on to the next stage of painting the yellow, which is going to be applying a shade wash of Agrax Earthshade from Games Workshop. Now for this step, I'm not going to apply the wash all over the model. In fact, I'm going to be far more focused. And what I'm actually going to do is apply it as a recess shade. So what that means is I'm going to apply it into all of the recesses and the grooves that I want the shadow to be in. And I'm not going to touch any of the flatter areas at all. So like on the vent on the top of the pack here, I've put it into the vent holes at the top and then the recesses around the edges. And likewise around the exhaust pods on the pack here, I'm going to shade down the sides but not on the actual pods themselves. So just work your way around and run that shade into all of those recesses and grooves. Try and be as neat and careful as you can, but don't worry if you're making mistakes, just let it dry and we can correct that later. That is the massive advantage of this method of painting yellow, is that there's lots of opportunity to correct things as you go, which gives you a much better finish at the end. And not forgetting, of course, to apply a little shade wash around all of those little rivets just to bring out that detail as well. And because this is a shade wash, do make sure it is fully dry before moving on to the next stage. And that next stage is going to be, as I mentioned, a tidy up stage. So I'm just going to come back in with some Ushabti Bone and tidy up any of those little slips and unwanted watermarks that I've got, just to really neaten things up and make everything really crisp again. For this stage you will need to make sure your paint is nice and thin so you don't spoil any of that smooth finish that you've got. So sometimes some of these watermarks might take a couple of coats just to cover, but it is really quick to do. Okay, with everything looking nice and neat and tidy again, it's time to move on to adding an edge highlight to all of the Ushabti Bone, and for this I'm going to use some bold titanium white from Pro Acryl. Now I'm using a pro acrylic paint here, but you can pretty much use any pure white that you want. I like this one because it goes on cleanly and smoothly. Other suggestions would be if you have access to a white ink, that works really well as well. And the aim of this step is you want to go around all of the model, picking out the sharp edges to give it that extra definition and highlight. So depending on the model you're painting, this could actually be a very time consuming step, but it is worth doing well and it is worth doing neatly. So do take your time and pick out all of those edges. As always, if you make any mistakes, don't panic. You can just let it dry and then go back in and tidy it back up with some Ushabti bone. So for me, this is the main advantage for painting yellow this way, is that I can get my highlights and my shadows fixed and nice and neat before I get anywhere near painting yellow, which can be awkward to say the least. Now, if you'd like some extra tips and tricks in terms of improving your edge highlighting, then I've made a video on that. So if you'd like to know more, then please do click that link above. Otherwise, it's just a case of working your way around the model and picking out all of those edges. Okay, so with those edges now painted in and any mistakes corrected, it's now time to do the fun part, which is add that yellow. And for this, I'm going to use some Imperial Fist contrast paint, thinned down with contrast medium from Games Workshop. So for this step, I'm not actually going to use the contrast paint for the method it's intended. I'm actually going to use it as a glaze. So what I've done is I've thinned it down to 3 parts contrast medium to 1 part contrast paint, and that's formed a very thin glaze which I can use just to tint the surface. So what I'm looking to do is I'm just painting a very thin layer across all of the surface of the model to tint it down to a nice bright yellow. But I'm not looking to make it settle into the recesses or create any shadows for me. All I'm looking to do is basically use it like a dye and stain everything to a brighter yellow. So I'm going to apply 1 thin coat to start with and then move on to the next step. As you can see, as I'm applying it, it does still look quite patchy, but that's because it's so thinned down. Don't worry about that, just move on and make sure you get a nice even coverage. We'll be going back and making it into a solid colour later. But for this stage, what you're looking to try and do is get a nice even coverage across the whole of the surface. So I find it works better if you work methodically, so work your way around in a direction around the miniature so that you don't go over the same area more than once and possibly disturb the contrast paint as it's drying. Because it's such a thin layer, it won't take that long to dry, but do make sure it is fully dry before moving on to the next stage. Okay, with that first glaze of Imperial Fist now dry, I'm actually going to come back in and add in some of the white highlights again. This is just to make them stronger and brighter for the final result. So all I'm actually looking to do is pick out the topmost edges and just anywhere that I want to bring that emphasis. So sharp corners are good, or any top edges. Okay, so with those extra highlights now added, I'm going to come back in and apply my second coat of my Imperial Fist glaze. Same ratio again, 3 parts medium to 1 part Imperial Fists. I'm going to apply it again as a single thin coat across all of the yellow, and this will then bring it to a nice solid finish and a really strong bright yellow. Which means then all I'd need to do is let this dry and finish off the metal, and this backpack is complete. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you found it useful. If you have, then please do hit that like button and drop a comment below. If you'd like to see more of these recipe videos, then please let me know in the comments below what you'd like to see. Also, don't forget to check out the description below, where I'm going to list all of the paints that I've used for this recipe and where you can get those at discount prices, so it's definitely worth checking out. And you'll also find all the links to the videos I mentioned earlier too. If you have enjoyed this video, then please do hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to click the notification bell to be told whenever I post another video. Speaking of other videos, I'd love it if you stayed on the channel, so why not stay and check out another recipe video, or perhaps one of my other painting videos where you can see these recipes in action.